Versatile Mage. Chapter 466. 2 kilometers at most. The party of 6 humans and a wolf had already traveled a kilometer across the drifting sand river without realizing it. For some reason, as they moved further away from the bank behind them, they could not help but feel uneasy. As they continued forward, they could no longer see the shore when they turned back. They could only see white sands in their surroundings, with fine particles lingering in the sky. I was told that the fine sand particles in the drifting sand river are heavier than usual, so the wind cannot blow them into the air. The white particles lingering in the air, which we assume to be sand, are actually the ashes of dead bodies. Zhang Xiaohou spoke up, remembering something his old comrades had mentioned about the drifting sand river when he noticed the nervous looks on everyone's faces, trying to lighten the mood. Chen Yi and Xingxia's faces turned pale when they realized that the particles occasionally brushing their faces were ashes of dead bodies, making them extremely uneasy. Mo Fan and Zhao Manyan both glared at Zhang Xiaohou, who had to mention something so inappropriate in a situation like this. When Zhang Xiaohou realized that his attempt to lighten the mood had worsened the situation, he let out a hollow laugh and quickly shut his mouth. Unfortunately, a gust of white sand blew in Xingxia's direction, and she subconsciously dodged, thinking it was ashes of dead bodies, interrupting her channeling of the psychic spell. Within seconds, tides of sand rolled toward the party from the front and back with dull roars. It was obvious that something was rising from the sand beneath them. From the tides of sand, enormous creatures over 5 meters tall emerged. They were bigger and scarier than the ones the party had seen before. The sand sabers in the creatures' hands were over 3 meters long, nearly twice the height of a human. The group shivered at the horrifying sight of the giant creatures holding such long sabers. Cold sweat slid down Mo Fan's neck as he swallowed subconsciously. His mental stability was considered outstanding among magicians at his level, yet when nearly 100 white sand giants appeared out of nowhere, his hair immediately stood on end, as if he was standing in the abyss of hell surrounded by devils. Xingxia quickly closed her eyes and focused on finishing the star pattern of the psychic spell. She knew that if she messed up again, the whole squad would be wiped out. It felt like Zhao Manyan and Zhang Xiaohou had turned into statues, even holding their breaths. Meanwhile, Chen Yi, whose scalp had gone numb from overwhelming fear, instinctively tried to cast a spell to protect herself. Mo Fan quickly tackled her to the ground without hesitation. "Are you trying to get all of us killed? Hide your magic's presence at once," he yelled. Chen Yi regained some rationality, but her heart was still racing as the white sand giants surrounded the party like a bastion of iron. Comfort. Without letting the team down, Xingxia successfully cast the psychic spell. Her voice seemed enchanted, not only dampening the evil presence of the white sand giants but also calming the fear in everyone's hearts. The group was left breathless. They never thought they would encounter even bigger white sand giants as they ventured deeper into the drifting sand river. Although the white sand giants were not emanating warrior-level auras, they were stronger than the white sand demons encountered previously. The area for hundreds of meters around the party was filled by the white sand giants, without a gap. It felt like they were surrounded by a magnificent sand castle built of white sand. Luckily, the 3-meter-long sand sabers were not used. The threatening auras from the creatures swiftly dissipated. As the hostility vanished, their bodies suddenly turned to soft sand and fell to the ground, returning to the boundless sand river. The enormous white sand giants fell like dominoes, sweeping a huge wave of dust into the sky. The spectacular sight left the 6 humans standing in the midst of it bewildered. The white sand giants completely disappeared a moment later, yet everyone's hearts were still beating rapidly. They glanced at each other's pale faces, still shaken despite being lucky enough to survive. After some time, they finally let out relieved sighs. "Housie, I don't want to hear any nonsense from you again," warned Mo Fan furiously. Zhang Xiaohou realized his mistake too and swore never to say something weird to lighten the mood again. Xingxia's face was slightly pale, cheeks covered in sweat. She spoke softly, The white sand giants here have a purer lineage and are more intelligent. I have to cast comfort longer to erase their hostility, so try your best to protect me, to avoid my channeling being interrupted." The group immediately nodded, while Zhang Xiaohou placed his hands in front of his mouth, as if trying to zip it up. As the group continued forward, Mo Fan noticed Xingxia casting the psychic spell more frequently, implying that the creatures hiding in the drifting sand river were more irascible. He began to worry if Xingxia had enough energy to last. Xingxia's face turned slightly pale from fatigue. The prolonged periods of casting the psychic spell had affected her, and it was hard to tell how much longer she could last. "Can you see the path ahead?" Xingxia asked Lingeling softly, who was sitting behind her. Lingeling opened the map on her laptop and shook her head slightly. "The path we've taken isn't perfectly straight. We still have another 3 to 4 kilometers to go. I'm afraid my energy won't last until then," said Xingxia. "How far do you think you can last?" asked Lingeling immediately. "At most 2 kilometers, said Xingxia. The conversation between Lingeling and Xingxia was clear to the others in the party too, and Mo Fan, Zhang Xiaohou, Zhao Manyan, and Chen Yi wore somewhat concerned expressions. At most 2 kilometers. That was bad. The drifting sand river was essentially a giant river filled with countless demon beasts. Without the psychic spell, they had no chance of surviving against the countless white sand giants. Most terrifyingly, retreat was no longer an option, as they were at least 10 kilometers from the bank they had come from. They had no choice but to continue moving forward. Chapter End. Versatile Mage. Chapter 467. The Inescapable Dangerous River. Xingxia's psychic spell could only last for another 2 kilometers, yet they still had another 3 to 4 kilometers to go. Didn't that mean they would eventually be surrounded by the white sand giants? Lingeling frowned, as she did not expect the path they were taking was straying away from a straight line. The situation suddenly became extremely tricky. Should we just rush out from this place for the last 1 or 2 kilometers? We should be safe if we reach the banks. 1 or 2 kilometers won't take us much time if we run at full speed, said Zhang Xiaohou. Mo Fan slapped the back of Zhang Xiaohu's head and scolded him. Did you forget what happened just a short time ago? The white sand giants line up like an impenetrable wall. It's like a sand fortress. That's true, it's not realistic to try and barge our way out. We should come up with a plan, said Zhao Manyan. This drifting sand river does not have unlimited demon beasts. It's just that those within a few kilometers will gather rapidly when someone is trespassing into their territory. That means, if we could somehow bait them somewhere else, we can proceed without the psychic element, pacify spell for some distance. The problem is, how can we lure them away? Don't tell me we're simply throwing some bloody organs far away like what Lingeling did. I don't think these white sand giants are that stupid, spoke up Chen Yi. After discussion, the group came up with a plan. They would send someone fast with high evasion away from the team to wake all the white sand demons within a few kilometers, and after the demon beasts were a certain distance away, they would find a way to regroup with that person. However, the plan was extremely dangerous. The person away from the team would not even have the chance to escape from the surround and would die a horrible death to the demon beasts. The group could not think of a better plan. They did not stop moving, as Xingxia's energy was still being expended. The party had traveled another kilometer. Without a better plan, they had no choice but to let Zhang Xiaohou take the risk. I think it's not feasible to only let a single person be the bait. The guy is dead for sure. Since we're going to wake up all the white sand demons within a few kilometers, we might as well spread them apart. We won't stand a chance if they gather together, but if we could split them up by letting someone quick kite them around, and someone with high defense to keep them occupied for some time, and those with high damage can eliminate the white sand demons as quickly as possible to clear a path. Sister Xingxia's psychic spell can hold some of them off, too. That way, we'll conserve more of her energy, said Lingeling. Everyone nodded when they heard the proposal from the party's brain. Instead of placing someone's life in danger as the bait, they preferred to face the situation as a whole by utilizing the party's strength. It would be easier for everyone to deal with the white sand demons once the demons were split up, but everyone had their specific role in the plan, and not the slightest mistake could be allowed. If someone died or made a wrong move, the others would most likely suffer the same fate. Everyone could only take on a limited number of white sand giants at a time. In fact, the number of white sand giants assigned to each member of the party had already exceeded their limit. Either way, the plan was the most achievable one they could think of. The closer they stayed together, the more white sand giants were going to appear. Their white sand sabers were too powerful to defend against unless they were all defensive magicians. I'll be heading off then. Please keep an eye on the time. If not, once I wake all the white sand giants up, it's my corpse that you'll be retrieving, said Zhang Xiaohou nervously, his forehead covered in sweat while standing at the edge of the party. Zhao Mannion replied sternly, "Don't you worry. If that's what happens, we won't have the guts to retrieve your corpse, either." Zhang Xiaohou secretly gave Zhao Mannion the middle finger. "Everyone, head to your spots. The white sand giants in this area are still being pacified, so you can still move around freely. It will be too late once the effect wears out," Lingeling reminded them. Xingxia was trying to earn more time for the party. She raised her hand high up in the air, and when she placed it down, it was the signal that her psychic spell's effect had worn out. At that time, everyone would have to focus on fighting the white sand giants. The team was split up into 5 groups. Zhang Xiaohou was the furthest away from the rest of the party. Zhao Mannion was around 500 meters away, while Mo Fan was in the opposite direction from him, around 700 meters from Xingxia. As for Chen Yi, she was standing in the direction the party was moving, with Mo Fan's swift star wolf. Xingxia and Lingeling were right in the middle of everyone. With the psychic element, Xingxia was able to hold a large area of the white sand giants off. If anyone from the team could no longer hold the ground, they could move closer to her to guarantee their safety, but it would increase Xingxia's burden. I shouldn't have come in such a rush. If I waited until I've got the armor from Huo Tuo, it would be a lot easier to fight these white sand giants, mumbled Mo Fan, walking across the white sand. Everyone within a few hundred meters was filled with the white sand. It seemed to be clean and elegant, yet when he thought of the countless corpses lying under the ground, and the white sand giants that could appear at any second and kill without hesitation, he could feel his hair standing on end. Mo Fan glanced into the distance, where Zhang Xiaohou was standing. The guy was like a criminal standing on the execution ground waiting for his death, extremely nervous. After all, they had only come up with the plan. They had no idea if it would work. Everyone shifted the gazes toward the center, where Xingxia was standing. As Xingxia slowly lowered her hand, they could feel their hearts tightening. Their breathing slowed down, as they could feel a spasm in their legs, yet it was only the touch of the sand drifting in the wind. The sun was hanging on the horizon, its last hint of calming rays withdrawing into the darkness. Meanwhile, Xingxia's pale and skinny right hand dropped to her side. Like a goddess of light who had abandoned the land, handing it over to be ruled by evil and slaughter, no one knew what was going to happen next. Chapter N. Versatile Mage. Chapter 468. The Wild Formation of the White Sand Giants. Loud thuds were heard coming from the sand, which felt like the drums of death in the quiet evening. White sand swept into the air, like countless dragons rolling in the white sand river, rising to a height that could shroud the sky. A sinister, cold aura swept across the place, as the white sand giants rose from the sand, like devils from the palaces of hell, climbing out from the ground. They each held a 3-meter-long giant sand saber. Their bodies of sand did not look weak or vulnerable. As the sand packed densely together, it looked like they were clad in sturdy armor plates. Their eyes were filled with menace. The thing they hated most was their sleep being disturbed by other living things. Bloodshot eyes, thunderous roars. The magicians felt like something was exploding in their heads at the deafening noise, but before their hearts were overwhelmed by fear, the countless white sand giants filled their sight. Once these elemental beasts became hostile, they were far scarier than demon beasts of flesh and bone, as they were fairly reckless. The tides of sand exploded simultaneously. The fine sand drifting in the air prevented the magicians from seeing how the others were doing. As they recalled the plan they had agreed on, and the fact that any failure would place the others in danger, everyone immediately took their roles seriously. Crap! Zhao Mannion is targeted by the most white sand giants, yelled Lingerling, who was in the safest spot right in the center of everyone. Ideally, according to their plan, they assumed the number of white sand giants would be equally distributed to everyone's position when they split up. The truth was, these white sand giants were not robots. They did not simply follow the script. It was obvious that Zhao Mannion's area had the highest number of white sand giants, all gathering toward his position instead of targeting Mo Fan or Zhang Xiaohou. I guess it's a reflection of one's moral quality, crossed Mo Fan's mind. However, Mo Fan knew that now was not the time to ridicule him. It did not matter if Zhao Mannion was the weakest among them. He had to find a way to ease his burden. Otherwise, the playboy would simply turn into a lump of meat in a few minutes. Line after line, these white sand giants were exactly like some well-trained soldiers and would always appear in an orderly fashion. The creatures were so perfectly aligned in rows that they were practically layers of walls. Once they attacked with their sabers, their target would not have enough space to dodge. It was the perfect body-crushing saber formation. Zhao Mannion looked at the white sand giants surrounding him. As his vision was blocked, he had no idea that he was in the worst position of everyone. He tried to remain calm by casting a water barrier first, summoning a layer of water around his body. The water barrier was a very effective defensive spell. The unique effect from its third tier, circulation, allowed the magician to continue stacking layers of the same defensive spell around himself. Zhao Mannion had stacked 3 layers of water barrier on him when the white sand giants appeared. 3 layers was his limit, while those with better control of the water element could go 4 or even 5 layers. Most of the time, they would need to rely on a water element magic tool. The 3 layers of water barrier, circulation were enough to defend Zhao Mannion from the white sand giants' attacks. However, Zhao Mannion had underestimated their strength and numbers. When the sand sabers looming over him struck down, his water barrier, circulation immediately turned into droplets. Zhao Mannion's face turned pale. Luckily, he was already forming a star pattern. Zhao Mannion's fundamentals were quite solid. If he were like the previous group of hunters, whose star patterns were disrupted when they panicked, the second wave of attacks would have easily smashed him into a lump of meat. Light protection. Sacred shield. Zhao Mannion did not cast the second tier of light protection. As light protection, Rampart was more suitable for defending against attacks coming from the same direction. Meanwhile, even though the sacred shield was weaker than the rampart, it was able to protect his whole body. The sacred light produced some slight heat, perfectly wrapping around Zhao Mannion's figure, who let out a relieved sigh after hiding behind the shield. He finally realized through the gaps between the white sand giants that the numbers surrounding him were uncountable. These white sand giants were not strong when alone, yet they seemed to know battle formations in skirmishes used by warriors in ancient times, taking turns to execute attacks. As a result, after hacking with their sand sabers, the white sand giants slowly reformed their weapons and switched positions with those behind them who were ready to attack. The area Zhao Mannion was in immediately turned into a giant pit after receiving 3 waves of attacks, while Zhao Mannion, holding his ground with his defense, was almost covered in sand. "Help! Help me!" screamed Zhao Mannion into the communication device. His surroundings were covered in blasts. His voice could not travel far. Everyone else was surrounded in the same loud blasts, consisting of rolling sand gusts, the explosive blows of the sand sabers, and the deafening roars of the white sand giants. The only people aware of Zhao Manyan's current situation were Lingling and Xingxia, monitoring the tide of the battle. Xingxia stood on the ground, her eyes fixed on Zhao Manyan. She was thinking of spreading her psychic spell in his direction to help pacify some of the white sand giants. Don't do it, it's difficult to pacify the triggered white sand giants. If we start using up your energy now, the path ahead will be more troublesome. Lingling quickly stopped the kind-hearted Xingxia. Xingxia bit her pink lips and could not help but feel worried about Zhao Manyan. Don't worry, he won't die so easily, said Lingling. Xingxia nodded, choosing to believe Lingling. She subconsciously glanced in Mo Fan's direction. She worried about Mo Fan subconsciously. It had almost become second nature. Luckily, the number of white sand giants that had appeared at Mo Fan's position was not as many as those in Zhao Manyan's area. If Zhao Manyan, currently surrounded by the white sand giants, knew what the two girls were thinking, he would have had the urge to simply kill himself by slamming his head into a white sand giant's body. Chapter End. Versatile Mage. Chapter 469. 4th Tier Fleeing Shadow, Part 1. As Lingling predicted, even though Zhao Manyan was panicking slightly at the start after receiving the waves of attacks from the white sand giants, his defensive spells were able to stabilize the situation. The enormous size and large number of the white sand giants were blocking one another, and they had no ranged attacks. Besides, a defensive magician like Zhao Manyan could not possibly eliminate the white sand giants surrounding him, thus it would not matter how many circles of them there were. The ones that were attacking were only from the first and second circles. As long as the white sand giants could not break his defense with a single wave of attacks, he could still hold them off for a certain amount of time. Meanwhile, Zhang Xiaohe was in a much more favorable situation. The fact that so many white sand giants were at Zhao Manyan's area also meant that there were fewer white sand giants in his. Similar to Zhao Manyan, Zhang Xiaohe did not have any destructive spells he would use. Therefore, instead of wasting his energy trying to kill the white sand giants, he was simply kiting them around in circles. The white sandy ground allowed Zhang Xiaohe to cast Earth Wave at his will. In addition to that, his Earth Element spells also had special effects because of his Soul Seed. The white sand giants were not very quick. Even raising their heavy sand sabers alone would take a whole 2 seconds, which gave the agile Zhang Xiaohe lots of time to react. Clank, clank. The bulky sand sabers were slashing in Zhang Xiaohe's direction, yet they could only hit the gusts left in his wake. There were only 3 movement spells among all basic spells, and Zhang Xiaohe had 2 of them. On top of that, Zhang Xiaohe was wearing a pretty good pair of magical boots. With so many ways of moving around, he was one of the few magicians that could weave his way through the demon beasts. Zhang Xiaohe maintained his speed as he ran. When he turned around and saw the clumsy white sand giants had been left 100 meters behind, and was just about to feel pleased with his speed, clouds of white sand jetted into the air ahead of him suddenly. 10 white sand giants rose from the ground, using their bodies to build a 20-meter-long wall. Zhang Xiaohe suddenly realized that the white sand giants would not stupidly chase after him with their feet. They could easily move through the sand under the surface and quickly arrive at the destination. Otherwise, how was it possible for the white sand giants to quickly gather at an enemy's position? The long sabers waved wildly, slashing in Zhang Xiaohe's direction. With enemies on his trail, he could not afford to alter his path, so he swiftly drew a star pattern under his feet. Rock barrier. Zhang Xiaohe halted his running, skidding toward the white sand giants, and pushed his hands forward. A rock barrier wall formed with the soul seed flowing mud emerged from the ground. As the rock barrier rose to protect Zhang Xiaohe, the 10 sand sabers that were hacking at him collided with the spell. Under the white sand giant's shocking strength and the blunt blows from the sand sabers, the spirit-grade earth element defensive spell was soon shattered into pieces. Zhang Xiaohe's heart raced when his defense crumbled. A blue swirl suddenly wrapped around his feet in the shape of a pair of boots. The wind boots boosted Zhang Xiaohe to his limit, raising an aftertrail of sand behind him. The white sand giants pursuing after him were planning to crush him into minced meat but ended up slamming into the wall of white sand giants ahead of him. As a loud crash similar to a traffic accident came from behind him, Zhang Xiaohou broke into a frightened sweat. Fortunately, he was able to put the magical boots that he had recently acquired to use. If he was cornered by the white sand giants, he would die to their sand sabers despite the variety of movement spells he had. While catching his breath, Zhang Xiaohou glanced in Mo Fan's direction to check how he was doing. Unlike Zhao Manyan and Zhang Xiaohou's approach, Mo Fan was focusing on killing. Mo Fan had plenty of offensive spells. There was no need for him to delay fighting against the white sand giants. Even their thick sand armor plates stood no chance against the destructive power of the lightning and fire elements. The full power of Fiery Fist, 9 halls was displayed against demon beasts that lined up in rows. Every time Mo Fan cast the spell, the white sand giants would fall to the ground in chunks. However, Mo Fan needed some time to cast the Fiery Fist, 9 halls, so he had to switch between different spells before he had enough time to illustrate the star pattern. Luckily, the battle broke out as the sun was setting, allowing him to utilize his shadow element. Otherwise, with so many white sand giants flanking him at the same time, he would never have the chance to complete the complicated star pattern. It was not like Mo Fan had never experienced being surrounded by demon beasts before. When he was in the middle of the giant lizards back in Jinlan City, he had used his 4th tier lightning strike to create a paralyzing electric field around him. Unhappily, the paralyzing effect of lightning strike was not effective against these white sand demons. The elemental beasts did not have flesh or blood, so the damage inflicted by the lightning element was reduced to a certain degree. As such, Mo Fan was only using the lightning spells to penetrate their armor plates for a killing blow. The most effective element was fire. Even though a single 4th tier fire burst alone was not enough to inflict serious damage to the white sand giants, it was able to disrupt their formation briefly, and a few more would blast them into pieces. Every time he killed a white sand giant, the little loach pendant would retrieve their soul remnant. Mo Fan quickly killed at least 10 white sand giants. It appeared that the soul remnants from the white sand giants were relatively high quality. Initially, Mo Fan needed 30 servant-class soul remnants to refine a soul essence, but after collecting 10 soul remnants of the white sand giants, the little loach pendant produced a servant-class soul essence. As a matter of fact, Mo Fan had already strengthened 5 of the stars in the Shadow Element Nebula. He could strengthen another with the freshly acquired soul essence, which meant he was only 1 soul essence away from improving the Shadow Element basic spell, Fleeing Shadow, to the 4th tier. That being said, he would need to kill around 40 more white sand giants to refine another servant-class soul essence and rank up his Fleeing Shadow. If he could level up the spell, it would be a glimpse of hope that could change the tide of this difficult battle. Chapter End. Versatile Mage. Chapter 470. 4th Tier Fleeing Shadow, Part 2. Mo Fan never assumed himself to be outstanding when it came to luck. The main protagonist in many TV dramas and novels would always acquire a manual of some peerless martial arts after jumping off a cliff, or discover some rare drop from killing an ordinary wild pheasant that turned out to be a golden pheasant. However, it appeared that he was pleasing to the eyes of the goddess of luck for once. Mo Fan was a servant-class soul essence away from ranking up his shadow element Fleeing Shadow to the 4th tier, and to his astonishment, the 4th white sand giant he killed somehow dropped a servant-class soul essence. It was only his 2nd time having such good luck. It was extremely rare for a demon beast to drop a soul essence, despite the number of demon beasts he had killed in the past. Normally, Mo Fan would sell the natural servant-class soul essence for money. After all, he could not withdraw the soul essences that the little loach pendant had refined, thus he could only use them to strengthen his spells. The natural ones were sold for money, and the artificial ones were used to strengthen his spells, since he was able to slowly collect soul remnants and refine them into soul essences. Currently, Mo Fan was just a soul essence short. Knowing that the party was in a dangerous position, it was better to improve his spells to provide some relief for the difficult situation. The White Sand Giants obviously had a purer lineage among servant-class demon beasts, hence their soul remnants were of higher quality, with a higher chance of dropping soul essences. Mo Fan used his fleeing shadow to move to a safer spot. After buying himself some time, he quickly diverted some attention to strengthening the last two basic stars of his shadow element. The transformation of the stars in the spiritual world seemed like a time-consuming process, but it actually happened almost instantly. As the White Sand Giants chopped with their sand sabers in Mo Fan's direction, his figure sank into the shadow of the clouds once again. The White Sand Giants were not brainless. When they learned that Mo Fan would always turn into a lump of shadow after casting Fleeing Shadow, they began to chase after the shadows to drive Mo Fan out. The good teamwork was displayed as they worked together to block the direction Mo Fan was moving toward. They raised their sabers, and as they chopped down, they immediately raised a tide of sand. The sand gust tumbled around the sabers, doubling the power of their attacks. If a shadow magician was attacked while under Fleeing Shadow's effect, the damage inflicted to the magician was higher. Mo Fan, who had turned into the shadows, had nowhere to escape to. As the sand sabers struck the shadow fiercely, it exploded into pieces and was swept away by the shockwave. If someone were hiding in the shadow, they would be dead for sure. The White Sand Giants had stiff grins after they finally eliminated the annoying magician. They did enjoy having an intruder's blood smeared on the sand. Rose Flame Fiery Fist, 9 halls. Mo Fan's attempt at a dignified voice suddenly appeared from another direction. The White Sand Giants quickly turned around and stared at Mo Fan, who was supposed to be dead, yet still appeared out of nowhere. They were totally confused about how he had escaped, even though they had been chasing after the shadow all along. Mo Fan's figure was engulfed in bright, rose-colored flames. The light from the flames revealed a smile with a hint of smugness on his face. The White Sand Giants could never expect Mo Fan to level up his Fleeing Shadow to the 4th tier in the middle of the battle. The 4-tier Fleeing Shadow was very useful. It allowed him to summon a deceiving shadow to confuse the enemy, while his true self could hide at the same spot and move to their blind spot while their attention was driven away. The fake shadow had managed to catch his enemy's attention, giving him enough time to cast his strongest destructive spell. The flames around Mo Fan's body quickly gathered on his hand as he stared at the group of White Sand Giants. As the energy reached a limit, Mo Fan drove the overwhelming energy in his fist into the ground. The surging magma penetrated the sand and swiftly split into 9 streams. The White Sand Giants had grouped up when they tried to stop Mo Fan's shadow, and now the sands around them were burning red from the heat of the fiery fist. 9 scorching pillars jetted out from the ground in a row, with burning molten stone shooting into the air. Flames like serpents spread wildly between the 9 pillars. The extreme temperature and the imperious aura of the flames felt like purgatory, leaving no room for anything to live. Even though the White Sand Giants were huge in size, their bodies were made of sand. The power of the fire pillars was strong enough to scatter them, while the flames quickly destroyed their life force. The attack of the fiery fist, 9 halls, was shocking. When many demon beasts were gathered in an area, it could destroy them all without mercy. Even the White Sand Giants, whose bodies were as sturdy as the flesh of a warrior-level creature, stood no chance against the destructive fire spell. All the White Sand Giants that were caught in the flames of the 9 fire pillars were annihilated. The 20 White Sand Giants turned into soul remnants and were drawn into Mo Fan's pendant. 20 soul remnants of the White Sand Giants were equivalent to 60 soul remnants of ordinary servant-class demon beasts. As such, Mo Fan was halfway to refining his next servant-class soul essence already. He had already improved 3 of his basic spells to the 4th tier, but if he could strengthen all 49 stars of his nebula, it would improve his intermediate spell to the 4th tier too. The Fiery Fist, 9 halls power was already this shocking, and if he managed to improve it further, it would surely bring him lots of success. He had strengthened 7 out of the 49 fire element stars, which meant there were only 42 left to strengthen. It was a fairly big project, which Mo Fan could not wait to see succeed. The fiery fist, 9 halls completely turned the tide of his fight. For someone with many offensive spells, once he seized the initiative, he could cast his intermediate spells fearlessly, and the white sand giants stood no chance at all. Meanwhile, around 500 meters away from Mo Fan, the cooperation between Chen Yi and the Swift Star Wolf was still not enough to escape from the white sand giants' surround. They seemed to be in a tough spot, and had only eliminated 10 white sand giants so far. Chen Yi was shocked when she saw that Mo Fan had killed all of the white sand giants in his area from a quick glimpse. How is the guy's strength so terrifying? Chapter end. Please guys like, comment, share, and subscribe.